Jake with Bond Performance. Aside from the parts I build for these cars, front mount intercoolers, downpipe, mid pipe, cat packs, some intake parts, and various other little things, I like to try to be a voice for the people, the average enthusiast, and the fact that I don't sell anything else for these cars as far as brakes, suspensions, tires, tunes, or any of that stuff gives me the opportunity to really give you my unbiased opinion of what is necessary and what's kind of fluff, what's marketing, well, we'll call it BS, and what will truly benefit you as an enthusiast, whether that means in your daily commute, if you're into track days, or autocross, anything of that nature. So today we're going to talk about braking upgrades. Some of you guys follow my build, you'll know I've got StopTech ST40s up front and R32 brakes off of Mark 5 in the rear. I've done videos on both of those, but that's not really necessary for most people. So I'm going to flip the camera around and talk about what may or may not work out for your build depending on what your needs and what you use the car for. So I'll start off by saying not everybody needs a big brake kit. This car started life, well, I guess it's always going to be a non-performance pack model. So it had the non-vented smaller discs in the rear and the 312 millimeter, if I remember correctly, discs in the front. So these are 355s in the front now, 4-piston calipers. You don't need all that, especially if you're not going to do any track duty with your car. Now, the difference between performance pack and non-performance pack, the easiest way to tell is the performance pack cars will have a GTI logo on the front, and the rear discs will be ventilated like mine. So just a solid rear disc would be a non-performance pack. And then with that performance pack, you'd also have the E differential to simulate mechanical limited slip diff. So back to brakes. If your only use for the car is some spirited driving on the street, I wouldn't recommend a big brake kit for either the performance pack or non-performance pack. The most overlooked thing about braking is size doesn't equate to power. All of your stopping power is dependent on what pads you select. So these use a super common pad, which means the selection is basically limitless. I believe Porsche 944 is what these interchange with these StopTech ST40s. The non-performance pack brakes, really there's very limited options as far as what pads from both manufacturer selection and compound selection. So from an OEM standpoint, the performance pack brakes give you a lot more options. The other biggest overlooked thing is fluid. I'd have to reference the manual, but it's, I want to say every 3 years or 30,000 miles to start, and then every 2 years, 20,000 miles thereafter, they recommend you changing your fluid, which I would recommend the same. Or if you're using your hard in some extreme environments, yearly would probably be even better. Brake fluid's cheap and it's honestly easy to screw up. When your brake fluid gets hot, it can boil, and boiling fluid will draw in moisture from the air, which will cause the fluid to get dark, more corrosive, and a way softer pedal feel. So back to uses of your car. If all you're doing is driving this thing to work and maybe some mountain roads on the weekends, chances of you boiling fluid, even with the non-performance pack brakes, are pretty slim. Whew, it's a little cold out. I think I'm gonna move inside the car. So like I said before, the chances of you boiling brake fluid on public roads, even if you're getting really aggressive, are very slim. There just isn't the opportunity to go that fast, that hard, and that often back to back where that becomes an issue. Now, brake compound, like I said, being what delivers actual braking power, you can step up to a more aggressive braking compound, and that'll give you the performance characteristics you're looking for. So basically every manufacturer will give you a chart that will show more of a street pad. Their peak friction will be down here at a lower temperature, where a more track oriented pad won't work their best until you're at a very high temperature. So you need to be realistic with yourself as to what kind of temperatures you're really going to see. And if you have any doubt, you probably don't need a more aggressive pad. As you progress in track experience or even autocross, you'll learn where your weakness is in your brakes. And daily driver, honestly, I feel like just the OEM pads, or maybe one step beyond that with some Hawk 5.0s are popular. EBCs are popular just because the marketing teams tell you they should be, that they're sold by basically every single place that sells Mk7 parts. But they have probably the worst track record for reliability. They crumble and disintegrate when they're hot. Me personally, I wouldn't run EBC pads even if they're free. We could talk about that in the comments though. I've had a couple videos sponsored by StopTech, and that's why I run on my car, so I may be a little bit biased there, but I've run those on my big brakes all the way around and very happy with them. And that's including track, street, and daily driving duties. They're the 309, which is a sport pad. Then there's one a little bit less aggressive, which would be the street pad. And then still plan on doing a review of their race pads. Hopefully this year, if we can get some track days dialed in with all the COVID stuff still lingering. So moving on, slotted and drilled rotors. Yes, I have slotted rotors on my car. No, they're not really beneficial with today's technology. So slots and rotors were primarily designed way back when the gases coming off of pads were a big problem. With today's technology, the adhesives and the compounds that they use, I'm not really up on the engineering side of this thing, so I won't even pretend to know. But it's basically a non-issue in today's day and age. The downsides, though, would be cracking from hole to hole, and drilled rotors and slotted rotors, which I have actually experienced a little bit with this. In really hard, like torrential downpour rains, you actually lose braking performance because it's so saturated with water. Excuse me. So from a money standpoint, from a performance standpoint, high carbon blanks are the way to go. Basically, whatever's cheap, as long as it's of good quality and high carbon content. OEM through whoever your favorite supplier is, Rock Auto, FCP, ECS, whoever else sells OEM stuff are fine. You're not going to see an actual performance benefit, especially on a street car, from rotors. So pads and fluids are your two go-tos. How aggressive you go with those two things, really, you just have to be honest with yourself to avoid the kind of trial and error some guys will go through. A big problem that a lot of people run into is getting overly aggressive in the bed-in procedure. When you're bedding in brakes, it's easy to end up with pad deposits because you're putting a lot of heat into the brakes. So just be sure to keep in mind that you can overdo it with the bed-in procedure, and some manufacturers like StopTech, I know personally, their bed-in procedure is extremely aggressive. It's 10 stops from 50 or 60 down to 10 miles an hour in a row, then about 20 miles of driving without stopping, and then repeating that process all over again. If you did that with non-performance pad brakes, you would have no brakes. They would be completely boiled and warped beyond use. You'd probably crash the car. So don't overdo it on your bed-in procedures. Don't inadvertently cause issues with pad deposits by stopping. If you do have to stop, make sure you don't hold the brakes on while you're stopped, because it's like an iron-on sticker on a t-shirt. If you're holding those pads locked, or you set the e-brake with the pads hot, it's going to leave a perfect raised surface where it's transferred a ton of pad, and it's going to cause some nasty vibrations. So hopefully this has been beneficial to you guys. I guess one last thing I could touch on is brake lines. Stainless steel brake lines, are they necessary? Yes, no. It's a preference. I did all the way around on mine just because I was already in there. The ST40s require them. So just to make everything match, did them in the rear. Can I feel a difference? Well, no, I can't. But it was also done at the same time as the rest of the brake kit. At best, you'll get just a little bit more accurate feel. But honestly, with a OEM style free floating caliper, it's never going to feel that great anyway, which is where, other than just the bling and cool factor of having a big brake kit like my ST40s, for just everyday street use, the feel is what's phenomenal, and absolutely night and day difference from OEM. If you've ever ridden a sport bike and experienced how powerful their brakes are, that's the only thing I can compare it to. So I hope this helps you out. We'll get into tires in a future video, which once you've gone up to an aggressive brake compound, that'll be your next limiting factor for your braking ability. You can only brake as hard as traction allows. So if you're running crappy, OEM Dunlops on the car and you put monster track pads on it, you're not going to be able to stop any harder than you could with the stock pads, because it's going to lock up and slide. Same goes in the other direction. If you're running super aggressive R-Comp tires and you've got wimpy stock brake pads, you're never going to reach that threshold, just because the tires are so much stickier and more capable than your brakes. So that's another thing with being honest with yourself about your setup. I've got all season tires on the car now, so if I had any better pads than I do now, it'd be for nothing. So with the Somerset and some track pads, looking to do the StopTech track pads and 200 tread-wear tires, should be a good match. But I'll have a track day review and maybe even some testing on that when the time comes. So just to recap, a point I probably didn't stress enough: the size of the rotor doesn't have anything to do with braking power, it's only your thermal capacity. So if you've got a big rotor, you've got a lot of thermal capacity, before you hit that point where you're going to start having to worry about brake fade from the pad compound overheating and or the fluid boiling. So there's another road that you could potentially take, wow, stuttering, to avoid that, and that's cooling. So if you've got RS3, or I believe they're RS3, don't quote me on that, there's different cooling ducts OEM that you can basically just zip tie to lower control arms. Golf Dave on the forums has a lot on that. I believe they're RS3, and then the other popular one is Porsche GT3, but I guess they're not quite as good of a fit. I've got plenty of thermal capacity, so I haven't gone down that road. I do have my dust shields removed, so that way I'm able to get more cooling air across the backside of the rotor where normally they'd be covered. So that's another thing you can do. Another thing to help get away with more aggressive pad, more aggressive braking on a smaller rotor is things like titanium shims behind the backing plates of the pads. The titanium helps isolate the pistons from the fluid temperature. And a third thing would be ducting, especially you guys that have 2017 Sport package where you don't have fog lights. That's a good opportunity. Those kind of blanked off holes where the fog lights would be, for routing some ducting hoses to duct cool air if you're trying to get the most out of your performance or non-performance pack brakes, by increasing thermal capacity, by increasing cooling to the brakes. And obviously this can be a lot bigger issue up front than in the rear. That's why a lot of times you'll see only the fronts increased in size. The most famous quote on this platform is people calling out that the TCR race cars only use a bigger disc on the front and the smaller discs on the back. The actual non-vented, non-performance pack rotors Me personally, if I had to guess, obviously I'm not in the loop with their race teams or development, but running the small non-vented discs for them is good because they can actually keep heat in those pads. So the super high performing pads that, if the screen was a graph, need to have heat way up in the top of the temperature range, those smaller discs in the rear, which only does about 20-25% of the braking, they actually want to keep those hot to keep that super aggressive pad compound in its effective range. So completely different ball game than a street car, just, or a lightly used daily driver. It might see some track duty like mine. Apples to oranges. You can't just copy paste the TCR setup like some people will scream from the rooftops, because they're changing these parts basically every weekend that the car is on the track. Where do you really want to be changing parts on your car every weekend? Probably not. And also, will you be running a compound that requires such a high temperature for them to work their best? Again, probably not. So hopefully I've covered everything. If I didn't, I'm sure you guys will comment below. And please hit that subscribe button. Help me get to 1,000. And keep an eye out for the giveaways. I'll be giving away one of these hats and some stickers. And tossing around the idea of possibly some kind of parts discount incentive in there with that giveaway. Obviously that would be purchase required. No purchase required to win the hat and stickers. So hit the subscribe button, tell your friends, tell your mom, tell your wife, significant other. Hit the subscribe button. I won't bother them. There's no notifications. If you don't want them, it is just purely to bump my numbers up for the YouTubes. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next one.